Today we tackle the exciting topic of container gardening. From container basics to advanced techniques, there's something for everyone. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned as we garden smart with containers.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs, where every plant is performance tested, leaving you free to just enjoy. Find our award-winning shrubs at your local garden center.
For many, our homes are our canvas. Spring is a great time to plant your garden masterpiece with Encore azaleas. Cold hardiness, sun tolerance, and 3 seasons of spectacular color and blooms. For the artist inside of us, Encore azaleas.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 80 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
You have to rely on your gear. The way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do. The F-Pace, how Jaguar makes an SUV.
One of my favorite garden accents is a beautifully crafted and well-designed container. Containers offer the gardener so much flexibility with a nearly endless array of shapes, sizes, and colors. The best containers are a work of art in their own right and have the ability to create a striking focal point in the garden or accent architectural features nearby. Things have only gotten more exciting in the past decade as plant breeders have introduced an amazing diversity of compact yet durable plants that are perfect for container gardening. Many of these new selections bloom across multiple seasons, vastly extending their color interest and making them great candidates for containers. We start our conversation on container gardening with Carr, a renowned designer who every year releases hundreds of new and exciting containers for the most discerning gardeners. Michael, welcome back to GardenSMART. It's so good to see you again.
And thank you, and welcome to our brand new display garden. I'm so happy to bring you guys here and show you what we have.
I'm so excited to see this. The last time we were filming here, this was a bit of a steep slope that had a bunch of trees on it, and it is undergoing an enormous transformation. So, now we've got this beautiful retaining wall, and you've basically brought the grade back up, made it habitable for a garden, and done so much more. This is really awesome.
Before we did this, it was a wild, unmanageable, natural area.
Right.
That at the original, we were just going to place plants throughout to grow it. But I'll be honest with you, I'm so fortunate in that I make my living doing what I love to do and able to, use it as a hobby and everything else. So with this being my home office and with the creation of hundreds of new items every year, we needed a place to display our pieces and to kind of give ideas of what pieces look like in the garden and so forth. We were able to meld it together, and we're just so blessed to make that happen.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully well-designed garden. It's also a garden design with a purpose, which is to show off these amazing creations. You're so creative, and the containers that you come up with every year, it's hundreds of new designs every year, so it's a lot of work. And this gives customers or fellow gardeners the ability to see what these containers actually look like in their native habitat, which is the garden. And also, as I walk through this garden, it gives me a bunch of new ideas. So it's a way of just getting the juices flowing of what we can do with containers and then how they might look in certain color combinations, in certain placements in the garden. And it's really inspiring.
It really does help to see something inside a pot. A lot of times when you walk into the garden center, they're beautiful and whatnot, but all you see is an empty hole. And it just helps to be able to spur imagination and stuff where people can see, hey, it may look like this, or maybe I can use this pot, or the color looks great with this pot. And that's the idea we wanted to use here. And with what we have a lot of shrubbery and perennials that will continue to grow, so we'll be able to just swap pots out throughout the year and throughout the seasons to get different looks. So that's the goal of what we have here.
Yeah, it's a great design because much of what's planted here is more dwarf compact plants that gives you a nice foundation, and it allows the planters to be these vertical accent pops throughout the garden. And so the garden, in many ways, really is designed to show off the containers, and even the plant selections are designed to allow the containers to be the star of the show. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to have you guys here, and thank you for coming.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Alrighty.
We've had the pleasure of featuring Pamela Crawford on GardenSMART in the past, and it's always a treat to have her back. Pamela earned her master's degree in landscape architecture and has been creating beautiful designs ever since. She's also a consummate author, publishing 12 books to date that focus on all aspects of container gardening and design. Along the way, she's designed her own line of garden products that push the boundaries of the way one can use containers in a wide variety of spaces. Today we take a walk through one of her latest designs that's a stunning combination of classic garden design that also incorporates containers throughout. Pamela, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So this is a wonderful design, and it looks amazing. We've been able to see, just the different stages of this coming together, and seeing it in more or less a finished state where things have started growing in. It's just amazing. You should be very, very proud.
Thank you. I have a long career in design, both with planters and with plants, but what has been the theme has been color. So this was a dream to me. And what has really made it possible are the new advances in pottery. So we have so many gorgeous glazes, so many beautiful colors, and the new advances in breeding. Whereas a hydrangea, some of them bloom for about a week. We have a hydrangea right here that blooms a full 6 months.
I love what's happening with the new breeding programs, where also breeders are looking for plants that are more compact and more dense so that you can actually use them in tighter spaces or even use more of them, and they're easier to take care of too. You can think of in this space, there are some hydrangeas that would get, say, 8 feet tall by 6 feet wide. It'd be completely inappropriate for this design. But little quickfire right here, it's a nice, compact hydrangea that has super long blooming seasons, as you said.
The garden, as I said, was meant to showcase pottery and color. And I've divided it into 4 quadrants so that I could have 4 different color schemes, so that I would have a place for every one of the new super plants like the little quickfire.
Well, let's talk through the plants here. There's a number that have become like industry rock stars, like the lo and behold blue chip Budleia. It's an absolutely fantastic plant, and once again, when we think about Budleia, we think of these plants that become almost like garden bullies. Little blue chip is this beautiful little tight, compact. It gets only about 1.5 feet tall, so it's perfect. It's used almost like a ground cover, but the flower power is amazing with that plant.
It is, and the pollinators are just flocking to it. But if you look at how it works with everything else here, this is my pastel quadrant, and it kind of shows you how everything works together with the little Budleia and the other plants. This is not only about color, but also about texture. So you see 3 different flower shapes, with the Budleia with the long, thin flower, with the echinacea with the big brown flower that's flat, and then with our star, the hydrangea, with the round flower. That makes them differentiate more with your eye. So you don't see it as one big thing with one thing blurring into another, but as separate entities that make up the whole.
Right, absolutely. And I love this new echinacea, not only for the fragrance, but white echinacea too, I think is very underrated. This cultivar is the Prince's White, and it also is somewhat compact, so we would expect it to get maybe 18 to 24 inches, so it's very appropriate for this design. Of course, it works with the pastel theme. And I would also point out, we've got this touch of gold. Holly is kind of the theme that ties all 4 of the quadrants together, because it is your border, and it actually works with all 4 of the different color schemes.
Touch of Gold is the star. It actually unifies each of the different quadrants, and it shows how the gold goes so well with almost every color scheme you use.
Well, let's talk about the containers a little bit too. I know that's your specialty among many, many other things, Pamela. And there's so many fun plants in containers. So we see lantana in a container. Of course, it's a wonderful choice. Long bloom time and a really, really high impact plant. Mandevilla, many of these beautiful plants that in many cases they're annuals, but it's a nice blend of annuals and perennials.
The other thing that I think is important in this quadrant is that I'm using the colors of the containers to coordinate with the colors of the flowers.
Right.
I was able to do that with whites. I was able to do it with that pale aqua. I did go out of the lines a little bit when I threw in one that was a dark color, and that was just a question of putting it there and see how it worked compositionally, and it looked great.
Yeah, I love what's going on with the foliage too. So, you know, Decandra Silver Falls, I think, is a classic for containers. So you get that kind of like glaucous silvery foliage that is a wonderful backdrop for the other like deep green foliage plants that you would have in those containers. So much to see here, Angelonia, those kind of plants that really do work well in containers. So Pamela, as we move over to quadrant 2, this basically is a study in contrast.
Yes.
Which I think is a very important thing for people to understand about good design. That oftentimes, you know, we want colors that are, you know, comparative, and then others that are contrasting. And it really gives us a great sense of how powerful these plants are. You know, we look at like Abelia Miss Lemon and then juxtaposed against this amazing Loropetalum Purple Daydream. They're two plants that couldn't be more different from a standpoint of their foliage colors, but it makes both of them really pop.
And you add to that the Ilex touch of gold.
Right.
Because if you look at the Loropetalum next to the Ilex makes the Loropetalum pop quite a bit more. It makes it show up, should I say. And then at the same time, the Abelia Miss Lemon also makes the Loropetalum show up. Loropetalum is a fairly commonly used plant, at least through the southeast.
Right.
I see it so often just put up against dark green, and I sit there and say, why can't you put something light in front of that? Because that would really make it pop.
There aren't that many plants that have that deep purple foliage, and so I think that, you know, it is an important piece of the palette in garden design. And when we use it, we can get a lot more bang for our buck if we're using it in a high contrast way. And it really, I mean, this is a particularly amazing one. You know, most of the landscape Loropetalums, they do get, you know, bigger. It's really more of like a foundation planting plant. You know, these stay nice and compact, and the foliage really is the star of the show. They do have nice flowers, of course, and the foliage really is the star of the show. Let's talk about a few more plants in this quadrant that I think are really impressive. We've got this wonderful landscape rose. It's a breeze. I love this plant.
It's part of a group of small roses that have been hitting the scene for a long time, and they're fabulous.
Right.
Because you can use them as landscape plants. They bloom much longer than the old roses that we were used to, and they just keep going, and also they don't require all the spraying that the older roses do. And this one, the way it sends up those spikes, I think it has a very interesting form.
Well, and I love the way that when it blooms, it kind of puts the flowers above, you know, the other plants that surround it. So it actually makes it very visible. So even from quite a distance, this rose is very striking. So the star of this quadrant, it's Viburnum Steady Eddie. And of course, it's a new planting, so they've not quite come into their own, but it's another really wonderful plant that's gonna make quite a statement here.
Yes, and it follows the theme of contrast in that we've got white flowers that are gonna be huge next to the dark flowers. So each is gonna make the other look better.
Last but not least, let's cover off some of these containers. I love what you're doing with this alocasia, and we've got the heuchera there. So you've got this, once again, a juxtaposition of the nice, like kind of crinkled leaves of the purple and the heuchera with the enormous big green elephant ears. And of course, it's in this wonderful, you know, bluish pot. So a very high contrast design, but it all totally works.
Right, and it was I don't know if I should call it mistake or just discovery, in that I just tried some of those turquoise pots that were here and just realized how good they looked with all the other colors, and that's what we used.
Yes, well, excellent composition.
Thank you.
Pamela, quadrant 3 I think has so many fun plants, and I want you to talk through what your thought was for the design of this particular quadrant.
High contrast. I wanted the brightest reds with the brightest yellows with a touch of dark purple. Probably it was my most fun one to plant. It also is one that will come into its own more next year than this year.
You know, I love this spirea, candy corn, it's fantastic. In thinking about design, the foliage is so important. I love the blooms on spirea, but this foliage where it's always transitioning from like chartreuse to yellow to these like magenta red tips. It's got so many interests basically throughout the entire season, and I think that that's what makes it a particularly great garden plant. You know, oftentimes, even with some of these long blooming plants, that's still a somewhat limited season for the bloom. but the foliage it oftentimes can be the star of the show, and I love that about that spirea.
And if you put it up against something that contrasts, which you can see here, I have it next to the red roses,
right,
which works really well. We have loropetalum over there. The loropetalum is fabulous with it. A color that's very different, but that really pops with it. It shows up a lot better than if you just put it up against a dark green hedge.
Absolutely. Another plant that I love that I think is super fun is this Kniphofia, the solar flare. I think Kniphofia is a very underrated plant in the garden. It's one that we don't see in many gardens, and actually it's easier to grow than I think most people might assume, and it has this wonderful like candles or big spikes. Next year it's going to be even more showy, and it's a plant that I think gardeners ought to reconsider, and solar flare is a particularly great example of that genus.
Right, and if you, once again, for contrast, really get plants to show up, if you use a round smooth leaf next to a spiky leaf, the
right,
eye is going to see those as very different, and that makes it work.
Well, we don't want to not talk about Echinacea leucodifier, which I think is a stunning plant. We're seeing in some of the new breeding programs, I remember back when the very first yellow and corals and reds and oranges came out, it was a big deal. And now we're seeing these breeding programs that are putting out these super compact echinaceas that oftentimes will have multiple colors on the same plant. There's one that I just used in my garden called Cheyenne Spirit that it's got yellows, oranges, reds, and even like some kind of purpley coral colors. Leucodifier is also has got a lot of that same kind of impact because you have anything from like a light orange to almost like a crimson purple red on the same plant. I love that.
And it's a little bit startling to look at the plant and
right,
see different colored flowers, but at the same time it always makes me smile. It's just really cool.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the containers too, because you've gone with a lot of contrast in the containers. And some of the other quadrants, the containers are all somewhat similar, next to each other. Here we've got these bold reds, and then we've got, another turquoise with kind of like an earthen top on it. Even among the containers that were selected here, you've got quite a bit of contrast there.
Now the red I knew was going to work because red was a color that was here. With that big one, once again, we didn't know. And that's one of the pots that's marking that entry. So it had to coordinate with the other side. We had a turquoise pot here and we tried it. It looked good. I think we have so many colors in this bed that it just popped right up against it.
It totally works, absolutely. With this whole field of beautiful landscape roses, we've got more It's a Breeze here, which is beautiful. I think it all came together really, really nice. I love the way that each one of these quadrants is its own experience. As we walk through the garden, you have 4 completely different experiences in one cohesive garden.
Right. And for a gardener, it's nice because there's always something different that's blooming. There's something different happening every day.
Absolutely, it's great. Well, Pamela, we come to the 4th and final quadrant, and once again, it's a stunner. And there's great contrast, great texture here. It seems to have a little bit of like a cooler feel to it. And you've got some great plant selections here. I love Salvia nemorosa, and of course Violet Profusion is a wonderful new cultivar. This is a great garden perennial. Nemorosa in general is a great garden perennial. They do tend to stay more dwarf and compact. Violet Profusion will get maybe 16 inches by 16 inches. Snow Kiss, which is also, I would say a great companion Nemorosa, is bright white, about the same specs. I think both of those, especially planted together, are just a natural fit and they look great. A couple of other plants I think are well worth pointing out here. Kind of the star of the show is going to be Blue Chiffon Althea. So you think about the old heirloom Altheas that all of our grandmothers had one. There's been a lot of work that's been done there. Blue Chiffon, I think, is one of the most impressive ones, and its sister, Pink Chiffon, if you want more of the pink shades. There's also, double blooming ones, pink with variegated foliage. But Blue Chiffon, I think, it stood the test of time. That plant's been around. I remember when Proven Winners launched it, maybe it was 10, 12 years ago. In looking at using a lot of new stuff in a garden, I think it's also important to balance that out with some of the stuff that's been around long enough to where we know, yes, that's a great plant. And so in time, that's going to be 6, 8 feet tall, and it's going to create this wonderful accent piece in the middle of this garden. It's going to be fantastic.
I mixed the Rose of Sharon, or Althea, with a red plant. Oh so easy. Rose has a more structured feel to it. It looks more like a traditional rose. It grows a little bit larger than the other roses we've looked at. It gets maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, and it's going to be covered in blooms throughout a lot of the warm season.
Some of the other accents that I think are worth pointing out in this garden are the cannas. And I remember cannas as a child. We had them abundantly in our garden. My dad loved growing them. They were easy to grow. We had large patches. And like many, many other plants, they've made breeding improvements on the canna. This one down here is Bengal Tiger. And I love what foliage does for design, you know, and the way that it can pop, and with that beautiful orangey yellow flower on it. You know, that's one that I think if you've got the space, it works great in a container, but it's nearly a must-have in a garden. I love that plant.
Well, and over here we have one that I think is one of the most exciting ones I've seen in a long time, which is kind of Cleopatra. It actually has both red and yellow flowers.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. You know, one thing I want our viewers to know is that nowadays, with the internet being what it is, so many of these plants, any of them, you can find with ease now and add to your garden. You know, it used to be much more difficult, especially with the new releases, to find the plants that we wanted. But now, the plant's released, and within a few months, it's available to the public, which I think is amazing.
Right. The online sales venue has completely changed gardening for us.
Right.
Because it used to be, I'd find a new plant and talk about it, and maybe one person out of 100 I'm talking to could actually find it.
Right.
Now they can go online and find it.
Absolutely. Pamela, is there anything else you would want our viewers to know before we leave this beautiful garden?
I'd like to talk about the purple plant, Persian Shield. It is an annual in most of the country, but it will grow as a short-term perennial in tropical areas. It has completely iridescent purple leaves. And I think, just contrasting it, I've got it with red pots, I've got it with white pots, I've got it with these gorgeous turquoise pots. It really makes a container grouping.
Absolutely. You know, I think one thing that I learn from you every time that we talk is that, you know, we shouldn't be afraid to be bold with our plantings and our containers, that gardens can be fun, they can be electric, and don't shy away from just making it that way. You know, go hard with the color and make your garden something that is a statement and something that is bold and fun.
Yes, take that chance.
Absolutely.
Conquer your fear of color.
Indeed. Pamela, thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
Each week we travel the country north to south, east to west, visiting some of the most exciting gardens, as well as talking to industry horticulturalists about design principles, new plants, and also how you can be most successful with your home gardens. We also love answering your gardening questions, so visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs, where every plant is performance tested, leaving you free to just enjoy. Find our award-winning shrubs at your local garden center.
For many, our homes are our canvas. Spring is a great time to plant your garden masterpiece with Encore azaleas. Cold hardiness, sun tolerance, and 3 seasons of spectacular color and blooms. For the artist inside of us, Encore azaleas.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 80 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
You have to rely on your gear. The way it feels, the way it does exactly what you need it to do. The F-Pace, how Jaguar makes it SUV.
What an amazing garden. We always learn so much when we spend the day with Pamela. If you have questions about anything you've seen today, visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, even if you're a master gardener, there's always more to learn. So join us next week for more great gardening tips and ideas as we garden smart.